This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35 or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux In-Laws, Season 2, Episode 16. Martin, how are things on this lovely winter day?
Oh, which century are you in at the moment?
31st, if I'm not completely mistaken.
And
The
end of global warming then, yeah.
Exactly. The Vogels have just been defeated, so global crisis averted once again. And of course, this is a courtesy to the flux capacitor that allows us actually to record shows in the future. But the topic is not about for the future, but rather very much about today. And tonight we have the special honor of hosting, I'm tempted to say, one of the, not most important, but much important projects in the area of distribution quality assurance. But without further ado, we have an electrifying, that's what I'm looking for, electrifying panel of people tonight. But so without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself, and let's start with Liv.
Right. My name is Liv. I use she, her pronouns. I'm located in the beautiful city of Bonn in Germany, or if you don't know the place, close to Cologne, or failing that, relatively close to Belgium. And there's a chance you might hear one of the two cats. And besides that, I'm generally into two things a lot, which is bouldering and free software. And besides FSFE stuff, I'm also working on OpenQA, especially as part of my main job at SUSE, where I'm really glad to be working with free software. So most of the stuff I touch is actually being developed and discussed out in the open, and tickets are also mostly out in the open. So that's something I'm quite proud of. And I guess that's it about me.
Barry, it's over to you, following strict alphabetic order.
Okay, yeah, so I'm of course also a Linux enthusiast. I'm also interested in programming and programming languages in general. And I also work at SUSE, also mainly on the OpenQA project and everything that involves the OpenQA project, like also infrastructure related things. I also live in Germany, in Nuremberg. I think that's mainly the most important stuff. I guess Liv mentioned a few hobbies. For instance, I could also say I like to go bouldering. We have the same hobby. At some point we should go together. But let's move on to Oliver.
Oliver, over to you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Oliver Kurz. I'm working in a team with Liv and Marius at the company of SUSE. I'm the product owner for the team called QE Tools. And I'm working with SUSE since 8 years. Also located near Nuremberg, although after the last pandemic, everything is much more flexible. So it's also a really interesting development which we have, and we have right now a rather distributed team, which I really enjoy working with. And my biggest fun task during work is that I can think of new, interesting, challenging, or sometimes a bit tricky new problems and ideas and work tasks that I can send into the team, and then I challenge Liv and Marius and the other members of the team with us.
So before we go into the details of the project called OpenQA, which is the focus of tonight's discussion, maybe for those people in the audience who do not know who SUSE is or what SUSE is or whatever.
Before you go into SUSE, for those people in the audience who don't know what bouldering is, I'm kind of intrigued about that one.
Okay, let's discuss hobbies first, and then we do the commercial pitch.
Yes.
By all means. So who wants to go first about bouldering?
Basically climbing, but you don't go very high, so you don't need all the safety.
Got it. Okay. Hence the name.
It's just 10 meters max. So you know, you do it for the impressive way of jumping down. You know,
it's still fairly painful if you fall. Okay. Thank you.
So there's something that also actually, or that could even be done in Holland, Martin, right? If we were talking just about 10 meters.
I don't think we have rocks that big, you know. We have some hills, but they're kind of covered in stuff.
Well, it is also an indoor hobby, so, you know.
There you go.
Definitely.
Okay, on to the more serious stuff. Carry on.
Okay. And so who wants to kind of give a 30-second overview of what SUSE is, where it comes from, and what it does, before, as I said, we touch upon OpenQA?
I guess I can do the part about SUSE. So, SUSE is a company that is known for developing one of the first Linux distributions, bringing that awesome new operating system to the desktop of computers since 1992. So, you know, it's like 32 years by now. And it also is a great sponsor of many products around that ecosystem. So we are really in a happy position that we can work and develop software like OpenQA in that ecosystem of SUSE.
So that makes it one of the oldest enterprise distributions, even older
Sure.
than Red Hat, right?
I'm not sure. I would need to look that up. Yeah. You know, there's like SUSE and there's Red Hat. Those are really like the dinosaurs in that industry.
No, I think Red Hat came onto the market late 90s, if I'm not completely mistaken, but then I'm old and gray, so I may keep forgetting things. On to much more serious subjects. OpenQA. Now let me give you a little bit of history. I first came across the project about 5-7 years ago, and then what really kind of drove me ever since, it has always been at the back of my mind, because I used to be an Arch contributor back in the day, so long ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that I baked my own kind of releases, but if you are a package maintainer, you're not too far away from the focus of OpenQA, let's put it this way. I may stand corrected. But what really got me going was actually the discussion we had last year and the presentations at OpenSUSE 23, where it kind of really opened my eyes what OpenQA really is, in terms of that it's almost tempted to say a full-blown quality assurance solution for an end-to-end quality assurance of a distribution. But this is just a layman's terms interpretation of things. Maybe now's the time to give a more detailed overview where OpenQA comes from, what it does, and what it is all about.
Sure. Who wants to give it a try? Marius, maybe?
I can give it a try. Well, when OpenQA was introduced to me, actually by a friend I know from university, who by coincidence also works on the OpenQA project. Well, he told me at some point people needed to basically insert a CD, not actually an ISO, a physical CD into the drive and test things and click through the installer, and all of that became a little bit tedious over time. So people were thinking, how can we automate this? Actually, Bernhard Wiedemann, one of our colleagues and he basically worked in the QA department of that time, introduced OpenQA. And it was basically some Perl script that turned ISOs into videos, in the sense that it would get an ISO and try to run it using QEMU, maybe do some automation, and then in the end you could get the video file of what has happened, and then you could watch the video and check whether everything looked good.
Right.
And
So that the start of OpenQA was really produce nice videos of an installation, not for testing purposes, but really have a video where you can see like, cool, here you click the next button, you fill your username, your password, you select which desktop and which packages you want to have installed, and then you boot the system, and then you end up on a nice Linux desktop, let's say GNOME or KDE. And only a bit later, the idea came just like, we can actually, that could be used for automated testing.
Actually, it was meant for testing from the beginning, as I understood, Dominic, but actually it involved some manual steps, like watching the video manually afterwards, of course.
Right.
So actually also quite interesting. At some point, they introduced pattern matching. I say they because I wasn't part of the team at this time. The team was mainly Bernhard and Dominic at this point. And the early versions of the pattern matching were actually based on regex. So they used Perl and the extensive regex features of Perl to actually search for patterns in an image, which was using some ASCII-based image format. And that actually kind of worked. Of course, by now, all of this has been replaced using OpenCV, but that was the first pattern matching for checking the screen we had in OpenQA.
Liv, I'm actually interested. How would you describe it? Because, during our normal work, we know exactly what we're doing, what we are talking about, but we don't name things. So how would you say, what is OpenQA?
So describing what OpenQA is, what it does, I would describe it this way in a sentence. It's a synthetic human or synthetic person who does the things a person could manually do, except it's scripted as much as possible. So if you imagine you have a computer, you use a USB stick with an image on it, and you boot from that, and you get into the installer, and you put details in like your time zone and your username and where the things are supposed to be encrypted. And I guess that's the main parts depending on the release. Of course, OpenQA does that with various releases of SUSE and OpenSUSE, and in principle also various other things. Like it can boot, I guess, virtually anything, like Windows, BSD, other Linux distributions as well. And so if you imagine as a user, you would be using clicks with your mouse, and you would using a keyboard, and maybe even typing stuff on a terminal. All of those things is what OpenQA does, except it's scripted. So there's backends for different types of consoles, for example, using SSH access, serial terminals, using VNC to be able to have some kind of screen, which then it's able to take pictures of or take videos of to be able to analyze them in the first place. So I think Marius mentioned it briefly. There's a pattern matching. So the images from the screen are saved either automatically or depending on the particular test on a particular part. Like it would say, okay, what's on this? Let's evaluate it. So going with a human example, imagine you're looking for something like the next button on the installer screen, and OpenQA would do the equivalent of trying to locate that button on the image that's saved.
Right. Important to say, OpenQA can use pattern matching from looking at the screen. It can also work with text terminals or fully remote interfaces, like you connect to a virtual machine or physical machine, which could be remote. It can be embedded platforms or in the whole range from big IBM mainframes down to a Raspberry Pi embedded computer. Also platforms used for automotive. Those are all used and tested with OpenQA. OpenQA is a test system for operating systems, but also for application stacks, especially when, same what Liv just described, you want to simulate a human as much as possible. So it's system level testing where you don't use any kind of special testing interfaces of the software. You don't need to change the software or the system that you want to that you want to test. You just instrument using the interface of keyboard, mouse, serial terminal, remote terminal, and screen.
Now, you kind of already touched upon some interesting or very interesting components of the architecture. I found a very illustrating architecture overview on GitHub of your whole architecture, comprising a web server, worker node, and including some other pretty advanced components. And you already touched upon OpenCV, which lets me to assume, or leads me to assume rather, that you actually throw in a distro, you tell it to boot, and then based on the scripts that you throw at OpenQA, in terms of what should be where, OpenQA actually takes a look, because also VNC is involved, if not completely mistaken, grabs the screen, does an image recognition on the screen, and then does some magic, and then comes to the conclusion that the build is screwed or not, or somewhere in between. Which to me sounds, and does that all in a scalable automated fashion, which to me, that sounds pretty riveting.
Marius, you're the expert in architecture diagrams, I would say.
Yeah, right. I actually created a very complicated one. So if you really look at the details and then put all of them together in one picture, it can be a little bit intimidating. But yeah, it's definitely a grown project with many different bits. Yeah, the web UI you mentioned was actually added quite early on, because running tests is one thing and displaying the results another, and you usually also want to have the results displayed nicely. And we actually also spend a lot of work on creating fancy dashboards where you can see the overall health of a product and navigate through different products. And yeah, there are a lot of things in the web UI. Yeah, and of course, the OpenCV pattern matching, which you have mentioned, is probably the most interesting thing from a technical point of view. And yeah, it works like that. Of course, VNC isn't necessarily always involved. You could also just boot something without screen and only work with the serial terminal, for instance. But yeah,
or
usually
in other cases,
Yeah.
for example, for Raspberry Pi, or there are also people using OpenQA for testing with the notebook hardware, just
Right.
interfacing externally, like grab the output from the HDMI port And actually, they're I don't have the URL handy, but they are hard to transform in a audio podcast anyway. But if you search for that, there is an interesting blog article about how to press the power button on a notebook with a mechanical finger, so that you can power on and off machines, which then can be integrated into OpenQA testing.
Right. That's basically powered by the general hardware backend in OS AutoInst. And yeah, it has things like grabbing the video from HDMI. Yeah, I think it's using FFmpeg in the background to do some conversions. And then in the end, of course, the same OpenCV pattern matching can be used. Yeah, also an interesting fun fact, the OpenCV pattern matching can even be used to compare audio. So for instance, we have an Amarok test, which tests that specific media player from KDE. And it does that by listening to the sound, but then it doesn't do anything specific to the sound. It actually just converts it to a video. So you have, to an image. So you have basically the spectrogram of it. And then it just uses the normal OpenCV pattern matching to compare the spectrogram to an image we have previously defined. And yeah, so you have a visual comparison of the sound.
And you won't believe how many bugs had been found already using that audio test by, finding out if either there was no audio output at all because a driver's gone missing, or the player crashes, or maybe the audio is distorted because there's some background process running havoc and such. So the big benefit is here, if you're getting the hang of it, how to write those tests. The test can be really very simple. Think about what Liv mentioned. A test would look like, a test description would look like, send this key, press this button, listen, look on the screen, compared to that, listen to the audio. And it's rather easy how the code looks like, but the benefit of such system level tests are really high and had been the recipe for success of, for example, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, which is, by comparison, how it's developed, how much effort needs to be put in, and what the return on invest is here. It's really amazing, I would say.
Which is more than interesting, because when I took a look at your GitHub repo, where apparently much of the, if not all of the code is out there, I came across quite a solid code base written in a programming language called Perl.
Yes.
Care to comment?
Yeah, I actually listened to your previous podcast about Perl. It was entertaining. So I know that you guys are also kind of familiar with Perl, and so what are you getting at?
No, jokes aside, the Perl episode was basically a trip down memory lane, because when I first started the PhD, we had the choice of two scripting languages, mainly for our quality assurance back in the early 90s, when we actually wrote that experimental microkernel back in the day in Dublin as part of my doctoral thesis. So we actually favored Python, but Perl was kind of very close second. But Perl at that stage, I had the impression, was already very mature technology. Now, given the fact that, as the foundation lightly points out, the majority of the internet still runs on Perl. Fair enough, it's a solid and proven technology, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's one of these kind of hipster languages like Python, Rust, whatever. Don't crucify me, by the way. But it was somewhat surprising, let's put it this way, that I'm always tempted to say, what's the word I'm looking for? Innovative hipster project like an OpenQA uses such a technology.
Maybe let's just say OpenQA is actually quite old by now. So obviously it's not written in Go or Rust because those were not available. I think C was a little bit too low level. And I think Java, C# would have been available, but they're usually not used so much in the Linux ecosystem. And well, I think Bernhard liked Perl, likely still likes it today. And that's why he wrote it in Perl. So a simple decision by the first person who wrote the code. And we all went with it. And
There's
to this,
possibly
yeah,
some good news though. So if any listeners are now thinking, Perl, that sounds scary. So a while ago we actually introduced support for Python, so you can actually write tests in Python. And it might be fair to say that you don't actually need to be really into programming that much, because a lot of what you do is really fairly straightforward instructions. So the kinds of things you tell OpenQA in a as part of a test would be things like type the following thing, type a password, run a command, even in some cases, like try running a script and see how that performs, or click these coordinates, or click on a particular part of the screen. So a lot of it doesn't necessarily require advanced programming knowledge, and I think is fairly beginner friendly as well.
Yeah. For the testers, I would say either it doesn't really matter, because you can actually just, with very simple commands, call any other testing framework which you might already have and just want to run in an environment that OpenQA can provide. Like you created OpenQA tests to make sure that you have access to a remotely controllable system, and then run your testing framework test suite as part of that. Then it doesn't really matter if you have like 3 lines of Perl to just call a command. Or on the other hand, there are ways to work with a different programming language. From our perspective as developers of OpenQA, I would like to say that when we're talking about actual coding, 80% of the effort goes into how to do proper software development, and and of course caring about the business logic, how to actually get the thing what we want, and maybe 20% is about how do we do it in Perl and how to write nice Perl code and such. So, but the majority is outside. But within the ecosystem, actually, we also have other tooling. So, from time to time, we come up with a new project, which is like, let's say, a plugin or some external scripts or some infrastructure helper tools which we need, and then we shift around with what we choose there. For example, I commonly start with Bash, and which is maybe also causing a pain for some members of the team, when in the end you still need to maintain something that is Bash, and then it grows and grows and grows, and it's still Bash. But or sometimes Python, yeah. But we also have really engaged members within the team who are, I would say, experts in the domain, and we have this lively, engaged discussions about software development, which I really like. Sometimes you can challenge the people a bit and say, like, can we rewrite everything in Rust? And then you trigger a response.
Yeah, we probably could.
Oh,
What was the response, by the way?
No, I wasn't serious. I just
okay, just curious.
Yeah.
I'm not going to. I mean, not right now. It would be a substantial effort, but in theory, we could. It's just the question of whether it's worth it. Yeah, right. And one thing I'd also like to note is that some parts are even written in C++. So, well, maybe yet another old language, but at least still popular. And that is mainly things like the video encoder, of course, the OpenCV-based pattern matching, or this sound to PNG tool I mentioned for the sound comparison. So yeah, under the hood, some things are also in C++ because otherwise likely the performance of these things wouldn't be good enough.
Right. If you believe the statistics from GitHub, then OpenQA itself, not the backend, but OpenQA, is 1.8% shell and 8% JavaScript.
Right. Of course, there's actually also lots of JavaScript, CSS, and HTML code.
So hipsters, if you're listening, it's safe. It's safe to contribute, so just go ahead.
Maybe it's not developed by, well, let's just say we are not people that like to reinvent the wheel every few years when a new framework comes out. So maybe we are not the hipsters
Still not
when
boring.
it comes to
I think what you're saying
development.
is it works, right? So you're not going to...
Yeah, but at least we never actually committed to a framework like Angular and are now stuck with Angular 1 or something. That's not the case. We just do things more, the good old way, just using JavaScript, DOM APIs, a few libraries, of course, because sometimes you want to have something more advanced. But we also have things that are probably kind of unique in the web UI, like our needle editor, where you can drag around boxes to say, okay, from this screenshot, I actually care about this button in the right corner or something like that. And you can also then see a div view and various things.
So any plans for WASM as in WASM on the way so that finally the hipsters can put some Rust into the front end? Just asking.
No, first we want to have the full AI integration and then we can think about that.
Excellent.
But I'd also be interested in WSM. I'm just wondering whether it's so useful for us because we are interacting so much with the DOM, and I'm not entirely sure whether it makes so much sense for us.
That's commonly where we say there's SUSE Hack Week for that. Because SUSE
Right.
every couple of months has like 1 week. By the way, when is it the next time? But save that topic, right? That's 1 week where all or most of the employees at SUSE can focus on whatever they fancy. And that could be a cool topic for that.
Why don't you actually pitch SUSE now as an employer, potential employer, assuming that you're hiring, so that people can apply and join this Hack Week? Just do it.
So shout out to everyone. SUSE Hack Week is actually also something that people outside SUSE can join. Right. And it is actually also a way how you can engage with potential new joiners.
Right. And I think in my explanations about how OpenQA started, I forgot to mention that it was a Hack Week project, although I'm not entirely sure on it actually. It's something that people say sometimes, but I'm not sure whether it's actually true. Do you know that? Was it a Hack Week?
No, I don't think so. No, it was actually part of more work-related stuff, and still you have the opportunity to try out crazy new ideas.
Right. One thing I will mention, since you said a thing about joining SUSE, we do actually have a couple of positions open. So if anyone is getting curious about testing things, so whether that's test development or things like test reviews on this would be in different areas. It could be fun cloud stuff. It could be things to do with different types of hardware. We are actually looking for people. So do reach out if you're listening and interested in this kind of work.
Links, of course, will be in the show notes. Our Bitcoin wallet address is as follows. No jokes aside. No, I mean, if you send me the links, I'm going to make sure that actually it finds its way into the show notes. Bear in mind that this this episode will not be published tomorrow. But before we lose Mr. Visser completely, maybe he has some questions too.
I do. Yes, sounds like a very handy framework, OpenQA, which I have to admit I have not used. However, writing a test suite for an operating system must be a pretty big job. Is that something that you get involved in or get feedback on? And people say, oh, because clearly it's SUSE's in-house automated testing framework. So who looks after the actual tests for the OS, and do many changes come out of those for OpenQA?
I think many tests for OpenSUSE are developed by SUSE employees, but also by contributors from other companies, but also just hobbyists. And I think also other distributions are actually now using OpenQA and also contributing things to OpenQA, like Fedora, Debian, and the laptop distribution Oliver mentioned before, and probably a few more actually. Also, the GNOME project is actually interested in OpenQA. So there are definitely contributors from various sides. I think also some developers who are just interested in certain parts, like OpenCV, have contributed in those parts. Although they don't work for SUSE at all and just like to use OpenSUSE.
Yeah, there are some limited contributions which are not from the core team, which is SUSE sponsored. For the OpenQA web UI is like convenience features or something to make the use more easy. When you're working with OpenQA every day, either as a test developer or as a test reviewer, who could be different roles for the same person, could also be different persons. You're like reviewing how does the build of today look like. Then there are certain things where you see what can make your life easier. More contributions actually came from people setting up the new products, which Marius mentioned, or trying to bring testing to new platforms, like test it on Raspberry Pi, test it on S390 mainframe, test it with a physical machine, cover Microsoft Windows testing, and all those led to contributions to the backends, where either using virtual machines or using physical machines, there were extensions being provided. And the test code is separate from OpenQA itself. So OpenQA runs the code, and the test code is in a separate repository, where there's also that the test code is like, let's say, it's intended to be very easy so that QA engineers who are not primarily software engineers can really get a start, because the test API is really easy. You have some template code, and then you can fill commands like type string, right? Send key.
It's typically a good thing that testers aren't the developers, right? Because they're completely different view on how to use things.
Right. But then also you can see that people grow into that area, maybe as a QA engineer working with automated test code for multiple years. You learn a little bit about software development. And in the end, some people carved out of the test code, let's say, helper code, and maybe create a library. And some part of that, let's say a minor subset, but still minor subset of that, ended up eventually in OpenQA itself, so that the test API or OpenQA code could be improved, could be extended to allow more, let's say, the audio recording and testing for the audio feedback, or the typing something quicker or slower, or not just clicking with the mouse on a fixed coordinate, but moving the mouse like drag and drop. That all came from testers who wanted to cover a certain use case and maybe kind of hacked that into the test code, which is certainly possible, but then felt like that should be part of the backend itself and then moved it there.
Makes sense. It's slightly off topic, but do you know how long a full test cycle takes to run for SUSE? Clearly not your area, but I just wondered if you knew this.
I'm not sure whether what you consider a full test cycle actually.
Well, if you generate a SUSE release, right, presumably you have a test suite for that.
Right. So, for example, OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. Tumbleweed aims for a daily release. So, on a daily basis, if the build turns out good, then it must be released. So, by that, it defines the time limit that it must not take longer than a day. And actually, what we have is every day there are at least 300 test jobs running. Sorry, not every day, every build, there are 300 test jobs running. And each of this test run is a complete machine, which takes something around 5 minutes to 2 hours. Okay, so let's say half an hour times 300 jobs. And that's the combined testing time that each Tumbleweed build takes until it can be released.
Speaking of which, where do you stop, i.e. what is the scope of your Tumbleweed testing? Let's take Tumbleweed as an example. You spin up a VM that boots some sort of image. You ensure that the live image is then installed on the virtual hard disk. You spin up the GUI, as in the graphical user interface, GNOME, KDE, you name it, or Plasma, or whatever. But what happens then? You probably log in with the user that you specified as part of the installation procedure. But where do you stop? Do you invoke a compiler? Do you play Mahjong or some other game? Or where do you say, now look, this ISO does what it's supposed to do? As the installation succeeds and the desktop spins up, maybe I can even invoke LibreOffice. I can write a letter, but the AI doesn't spell check or something. I'm joking, but you know what I mean. Where do you draw the line?
I know what you mean. I think there's no clear line being drawn, but it mainly depends on whether somebody has written a test for a certain application. So if nobody wrote a test for it, it's obviously not tested at all. And if there are tests, it kind of depends. But of course, you cannot, or rather usually should not, test too much details in OpenQA. We already mentioned you can test a media player, for instance, but you would check the basic features, maybe even the sound, but probably not go through every menu in the settings, because that would probably be a bit exhaustive. And also, that's then not anymore where OpenQA shines. Those details are usually better covered in integration and unit tests, which should, of course, complement what we do with OpenQA.
I would say that there are two important dimensions where OpenQA shines. One is when you have a simple test like the go through installer and boot into the system, right? Take that scenario and run it on all different kind of variations, like run it on different hardware, run it where you select different desktop environments like GNOME, KDE, XFCE, LXQt, whatever, and plus different architectures like x86-64, S390 for the mainframe, PowerPC, AH64, embedded PC, because all those things, you just need to set up the machine once, and then you can run the very same test suite in parallel over and over again on all those. That's one dimension. The second dimension is when you say, as Mario said, don't go too much into the detail of single applications, because the biggest benefit, I would say, is covering each and every little bit, each and every application or important area of the system just by, let's say, start the application, start LibreOffice Writer, start Calc, start the contact PIM suite, start Thunderbird email, start Firefox, can you render a web page, and then it's good enough. Start a lot of applications which can really deeply nest into the system and have a lot of requirements. And just by starting those and seeing that the test doesn't crash those is a real benefit and really actually simple to do and scales pretty well.
And just a side note, because otherwise listeners might get the wrong impression. It's not just about GUI, of course. You can also do this for command line applications. And of course, we also run kernel-focused tests. And also that's where OpenQA shines. So you can actually run, let's say, the LTP test suite, which are basically tests for certain Linux syscalls and also usually about the glibc layer. And that's also where OpenQA shines, because it's normally a bit tedious to spawn VMs of various architectures using various ISOs and so on. And OpenQA basically provides a good framework to do all of this and then run these kernel tests in such environments.
Now, a quick
Yeah,
question
so
from my
yeah.
side, because when I took a look at the source code on GitHub, I couldn't see any tests that take a look from a different angle at the whole testing thing. For example, there are screen readers for the visually impaired people that simply read out the text on the screen, like Orca, for example. I couldn't see any test suite covering this angle from an accessibility perspective. Did I miss this module, or is there anything out there at all? Is it just not on GitHub, or I'm just wondering?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think I opened a request to our fellow colleagues of the test engineers to please cover that area. I don't think we are having more than just like the very initial start the function, but then don't really test the function within the OpenSUSE coverage. But that also might be because, okay, I don't really know if it's how much that needs integration into the actual distribution, because we are not the one testing the upstream applications as much as the overall experience. And I think that's actually an important and good area that could be covered by that. I don't know about other distributions. If anybody out there is using OpenQA to test that feature, it would be really great to see that, but I'm not aware.
I mean, the reason why I'm mentioning this basically is, for example, if you take a look at Knoppix. Knoppix, I reckon, rings
Yes.
a bell. For the two people in the audience who do not know what Knoppix is, it's essentially, it used to be a system rescue live edition, so to speak, but Dr. Knopper, as he is affectionately known, has a special relationship with accessibility because I think his wife is blind or something like this. So accessibility, when he designed and packaged Knoppix, was at the very top of that priority list. Needless to say, this is just but one example of where actually open source software can make the world can make the world a better place to live in from a disability perspective. And it would be just great to include this as part of OpenQA, because that would allow people to make a difference, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes, I also think we probably lack test coverage in that area. And that might also explain the not so great state of accessibility on Linux. Well, it's okay, but for instance, I'm also trying to test my own applications and how they behave, for instance, if you enable a screen reader. And yeah, I think it could be improved, like the screen readers and the whole integrations themselves.
Now, and very, very, very great insight here. Before we wrap this up, because we're rapidly approaching the top of the hour, Is there anything we should discuss? For example, call to actions. Do you still need volunteers? Are you in a position, apart from the new candidates who want to work for OpenQA or SUSE in general for money? Is there anything with regards to contributors that you're looking for? For example, documentation or something like this. Call to action. Now's the time if you are so inclined.
I would like just to mention, because OpenQA, I mean, we mentioned many aspects which are very visual. So what I would like to give as homework to everybody interested, just go to open.qa and take a look around and see what you're interested in. There could be interest in actually contributing to OpenQA itself. Maybe you want to bring it into new areas. Maybe you want to help with, a bit more modern appearance or something. That would all be greatly appreciated. Or from the testing perspective, like think about accessibility. I mean, it would be really great to see open source contributions by someone who wants to maybe work with OpenSUSE tests about accessibility. Could also be other distributions. And there, over that link, open.qa, you can also get in contact with the community from OpenQA. There's a chat room on Matrix or other possible approach vectors, and we are happy to see your interest there.
Excellent.
Maybe we shouldn't close without mentioning our workshop on
Go ahead.
Friday.
Friday might be a tight squeeze because this episode will be released in
No, every Friday.
No,
actually.
every Friday. So that's
Okay.
that's really an opportunity to
Friday.
get in touch
Yeah.
with us if you like.
Okay.
And I think it's also mentioned somewhere in the documentation. I mean,
Yes.
when it's exactly and how you can join. So yeah, I guess I'll just mention it, and we always have a specific topic, but also sometimes broader discussions. And you could also bring up topics yourself, like the laptop topic. That was basically where some external contributor and user joined our workshop.
Okay. And the link is on the webpage. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep. Open.qa, multiple links, videos, documentation, see OpenQA Live in action, all that is there.
I watched some of the videos, especially the ones that are hosted by the Chaos Computer Club, and they're really awesome to get an entry into the whole, or rather an entrance into the whole thing with regards to getting started. Okay, and now it's time for the boxes. I know that Martin has run, so Martin, why don't you go first?
Oh, yes. My box of the week is actually the ancient Egyptians, since they invented the 24-hour clock. But
You say no, Martin. Excellent. Even before the Brits did. No, I'm really surprised. Anyway,
I'm also thankful for that invention. It's great.
Joking aside.
So Martin, onto your real box.
Yeah, my real box is Kepler 442b, which is a planet which is more inhabitable than Earth itself. So I'm looking forward to visiting one day.
Anytime soon, Martin, I wonder.
Probably not. It's about 1,200 light years away. So it might take a while.
Apparently, every now and then, good old Elon does some discount week, so why not give it a shot?
I'll get in touch with him. Yeah.
I think the URL is spacex.com or something.
Excellent. What about yourself? What's your box?
Well, actually, before we go into that, actually, why don't we let our guests actually speak about the boxes? So over to you, Liv. What's your box? As in pick of the week. Sorry. It's something that has come across your path in the last couple of weeks worth mentioning. Martin now just mentioned possibly inhabitable planet. He normally covers Amish adult entertainment websites or some other stuff, but now is the time to mention anything that has come across your way.
So something I actually found exciting. I don't necessarily know how production ready that is, but you mentioned WASM earlier, and there's apparently people working on running essentially a kernel that does nothing but run WASM codes with the idea that it makes the whole system/application more predictable security-wise. So I found this quite exciting.
And the name would be?
I can look you up the link for the show notes.
Please do, because that sounds really riveting. I reckon it also runs on your watch because it's tiny. Just asking, sorry. Anyway, okay. No, I mean, jokes aside, that really sounds fascinating because if you take a close look, and the reason why I'm mentioning the watch thing is not too far off here, because WASM actually, if you take a close look at the specification in comparison to say JavaScript, it's actually geared towards embedded system in terms of a hardware environment where you don't have gigabytes at your disposal. And a couple of 100 megabytes with regards to an execution environment is no big deal. So, and that's precisely basically why the Rust hipsters are so concerned about WASM, especially targeting IoT and embedded devices, as in the stuff that is out there running on your ordinary street lantern or something. Marius, over to you. What's your box worth mentioning?
I think I stumbled across news about explicit sync finally making its way in the different involved projects of the Valence stack. So that's definitely interesting and maybe helps with the system I'm, for instance, currently using. So it will be working a bit better with Valent. So yeah, that's something I'm looking forward to. Yeah, of course, it's not such a big deal like a whole planet or anything.
Explicit sync. That sounds like triple X-rated sync.
It's
No,
basically
okay.
it's basically a way how graphics drivers work, and
okay.
that kind of way it works needs to be incorporated into Valence so it works, for instance, with the NVIDIA driver more nicely, but I think also others. Yeah.
So this is kind of between the graphics hardware and the compositor, or
don't nail me down on the details. Okay. I'm mostly wanting to see the benefits for my own and setups basically, because without it you have terrible bugs in certain circumstances.
Okay. Now, people, listen up. Links, of course, within the show notes if my ad blocker doesn't prevent this. Okay. Over to you, Oliver. What's your POX?
I would like to mention the Product Owner Summit webpage, productownersummit.org. It's currently happening. It's a virtual summit about, product owner. I am a product owner, and I'm really excited about agile project development, and also been mentoring that and bringing them forward in trainings. And I learned some interesting stuff there the past days from live YouTube recordings. Live YouTube events. They are also recordings, but I'm not so sure about which one of them are free. There's some, limited places events, but still, I think there's a lot of material available related to that.
Are these streamed perchance, or even recorded or something?
Well, I watched live events streamed on YouTube. So they are for sure recorded. I just don't know which one of those will be, available, or if you need some special login.
Understood. Let me put my favorite search engine on the job to see what it comes up with. Martin, we haven't touched upon my POX.
Oh yes, I did ask about your POX, but then we sidetracked by
exactly
OpenQA.
Whatever, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway,
so my POX, yes, it's a TV series called Fallout. I don't know if that rings a bell.
It does ring a bell.
It does. Excellent. Okay. It goes back to a very popular game. If I'm not
video game, yes. I have the video
exactly.
game as well. Yeah.
Oh, you played it? Okay. So what do you make of the game?
Oh, it's many years ago. So it was fairly primitive at the time, but it was quite fun and fairly violent, like the TV series.
You watched Fallout?
I watched the first episode so far. Yeah.
So what do you make of it, Mr. Visser?
It's sort of a bit Pulp Fiction-y, really, isn't it? I would say
very much so. Yeah, without giving too much away, the whole thing. I haven't played the video game, no, full disclosure. The premise is actually what happened after the next nuclear war. and we have a
The
population
next.
of...
So
Exactly.
we have one already.
You missed that? Okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
No, the premise is actually we have vault people, also known as cave dwellers, as in people who live underground, and then we have the marine population above ground. And the whole TV series is actually about what happens if these two populations, for want of a better expression, or groups rather, clash. Very funny, excellent music, by the way.
Yes. Indeed.
And Martin, if you've only watched the first installment, it keeps getting better.
Okay.
The only tiny criticism I would have, but Martin doesn't know yet, so I won't go into the details, so that I don't spoil it for him and you, of course, is that over the course of, because I watched all episodes already.
Oh, right. Wow.
Yes. With the ample spare time I have, I wish that was the case. Unfortunately, it's not. Anyway, no, I mean, these episodes are only an hour long, so I think it's only 7 or 8 of them, so not a big deal. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, long story short, over the course of the series, quite a few subplots develop, and I think this is one or two too many.
Right.
But apart from that, it's really, really watchable because, as Mane already caught up upon, the humor is almost like Pulp Fiction, and the music, as I said, the music is really fitting, and the character development is pretty good, I think.
Okay.
But disclosing more would spoil the fun, so I leave it at that.
Yep. Oh, excellent. Yeah. No. Good choice.
So keep watching, Martin. That's what I'm saying. Okay, people, that has been more than fascinating. A big thank you for the whole OpenQA team that joined tonight, and very, very, very much a good road ahead with the project, because it's that sort of thing, not just from an accessibility perspective, that is needed out there to make the place a better world, to make the world a better place.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
This was really fun.
Thanks.
You're more than welcome. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Solid Market, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.